Hello, all, and welcome to the Icarus Hour with me, Lawson Tidwell. Writing is the right of all people, so I ask you to join me as we talk poetry, life, and other mushy junk. Today, joining me is Professor Amy Hill. How are you doing today?
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing, Lawson?
Oh, I couldn't complain if I felt like it. So, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you for having me here today. And as you know, I am a professor in the Department of Communication here at Tech. And last fall was my first semester being a full-time instructor.
Really?
I had taught adjunct several years before that, but this is the first time. And I'm a mother of two and a Christian and active in my church. And I also got my degree from English journalism at Tech in '97. And then I got my master's in business, I think in 2004, after working at Tech for a little while. And then I got my EDS and finished my doctorate up last year at ETSU in the summer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of education.
How did it feel getting a doctorate, out of curiosity?
That's a good question because I actually didn't think it would feel any different, but it really does.
I was about to say, it's gotta have like an air of esteem to it almost.
It really does. And being since I already worked as a full-time staff on campus, you'd be surprised at the difference that people
socially
have in their
almost.
mind. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like a lot more respect as soon as you put those two letters in front of your name. So
My brother kind of went through a similar deal, except, from the opposite direction. He could have gotten his doctorate in computer science, which, that's a big deal, right?
yes.
But he was like, why would I need that? It's silly for me to keep going. And then, he got a job at Oak Ridge.
Mm-hmm.
And like he felt palpably like the distance between him and his doctorate coworkers.
I'm sure.
It was very silly.
Yeah.
But so to tie you into the topic here, poetry. Do you have any love for it? Or?
I love poetry, and I used to, when I was younger, I would write poetry, and I would write songs and things, and Emily Dickinson is one of my favorites, and especially because she wasn't famous until after she had died, and I'm like, okay, there's still hope for all of us.
There's a sort of perseverance.
Right, right, that she just kept going because she loved the poetry, and not because she was necessarily seeing any fruits of her labor,
Right.
Here, so...
And that you can see that in almost any art form. There are people who put out independently produced everything just about now.
That's true.
Especially, you would know, published author.
Right. Oh, thank you. I forgot about that. Yes, I've self-published a few books, and then I published another book of devotionals, and that was several years ago. And it was so exciting to get that in the mail. And when they sent it to me printed, and it was done, and it had my name on it. And
I can only imagine the feeling. So is it safe to say that writing's been like an outlet for you?
it really has. And when I was graduating from high school and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do in life, I knew that writing was probably going to be part of it because I enjoy writing and I love art. And that I knew I didn't like math. So, I could do math, but I don't enjoy it. So, yes, writing's always been an outlet, even when I was in elementary school.
It's funny because, you mentioned math. I've always thought it's interesting people who can, because I in my mind, I've always considered this like an impossibility. Like, there's no way I could see this mixing into creative outflow at all. But there's people, who use mathematic, proofs and such to like write music and write things like that. And it's like, I cannot fathom how creative and how brilliant, like, logistically speaking, you have to be to do something like that.
Right, because it's using both sides of your brain at once. And music really is mathematical.
It is.
If you think about it. So,
but I think it's definitely on like a scale, because some music, you can write it directly, completely, musical inspiration. It doesn't have to be any sort of theoretical anything. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so much independently produced music in general.
And that's one thing. I do play the piano at church, and since I was in band in high school, I learned the notes and I learned how to read music and all of that. But then when I started playing more in public, I just learned the chords and just, it was kind of playing more from your head and your heart than actually the logistics. So
I remember it's a little cheesy, but there was a poster in one of my old choir classrooms that said something to the effect of musical theory is structured, but musical inspiration is divine. It was one of those little motivational posters.
Yeah, that's very
and
cool.
I sort of, it comes back to mind anytime I see like and this is, you've probably never heard of this because this is very much a, a more outer culture sort of thing. But there's a genre called like math rock or something like that.
I don't think I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's rock that's very rhythmically, like, you wouldn't be able to tell that it was written this way, but it's written very mathematically and structured, so it's all layers together. It's almost like classical composition come back through modern like rock music. That's very weird.
That's pretty interesting. That is one thing I do like about math. There's always a solution. You know, it's like 2 + 2 is 4 unless
until you get into some of the stranger parts. But I suppose
that's true. Yeah, in some cases,
how many digits of pi.
4. Yeah,
that ended up being. But
I think I only know 3.14.
I knew like up to 40 or something because I thought it would make me sound smart.
Oh. So. Did you use that at parties?
Yeah.
Hey
guys.
I bet you can't do this.
Another sort of off-topic note, but on the note of trying to sound smart, I remember in either late middle school or early high school, I remember carrying around a copy of the what's his name? Brilliant like physicist and mathematician, Stephen Hawking.
Yeah.
I carried around the book he's most famous for. I don't even remember the title now. That's how bad this was. But I carried it around and, like, you know, so people would look at it and go, "Oh, he's reading that."
That's funny. I should carry around War and Peace. Be like, wow, she knows Tolstoy. You speak Tolstoy.
Wow,
that's funny. And the only reason I know Stephen Hawking is because I used to watch The Big Bang Theory all the time. It was one of my favorite shows, and I'm like, who is that guy they're talking about? And I had to look him up.
It's always interesting to, like, because he's passed now, unfortunately.
Oh, he has.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, see.
But he was like larger than life, despite everything he went through. But to sort of bring it back, I did want to ask. Was there ever a point in your life where poetry seemed like something that you like would seem kind of outcast for doing, or something that you considered like almost shameful even?
I'd never really thought about that. Not really. I mean, the people I kind of hung around with, they were also into poetry. And, in college, since I was getting that degree in English.
Yeah, you're sort of surrounded by the people who would sort of be more understanding, I think, of the hobby.
I mean, I was ostracized for being in the band, but never writing poetry. So.
Yeah, that's another one of those stigmas. Right. That just doesn't seem to go away.
Right, it doesn't.
All right, you want to pause to write a line?
Yes.
Awesome.
Okay.
Good to go.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. All right. So, to get us back into the flow of things, what do you think has been your like favorite piece of art ever? It doesn't matter what it is: music, poetry, anything.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you asked me that. I've got this favorite book of poetry, and it's like it's a unusual size book too. It's not like a normal. It's like thin, and I just love the shape of it. And it's brown and old. And my favorite poem in there is called "If," and I think it's by William Wordsworth. Does that sound familiar?
Is it
or Wadsworth? I may have to.
Is it Henry Wadsworth Longfellow?
Or maybe it's Rudyard Kipling. I don't know. It's sort of those. If I can look while we're still talking.
Absolutely. That's the thing about poets, especially, is that I love their work, and then I always struggle to remember their names. So I don't know if that's.
Yeah, maybe that's a thing. But it's called "If," and it's just if I can find it real quickly, do you mind if I read like a line or two?
Not at all. That's what the show's about.
Oh, okay. And it is Rudyard Kipling, and it just kind of personifies my life, because it says, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too. And that right there is just kind of something I've lived by.
That's strong.
Because, we're not always right in everything that we think. But if we're constantly like agreeing with everybody else that we're not right,
then it kind of weighs on you,
Right, and it makes you weak. So you have to have your own sense of personality. Worth. But then give allowance for other people's opinions of you also.
Because that's the thing that, everybody struggles with is you have to find the balance between, maybe I can be right sometimes. And what are they talking about? I'm always right.
Right, exactly. And just, before the show, I was joking that, people had called me a narcissist. And I'm like, I don't really think of myself as a narcissist. And I told my friend about that one time, and she's like, if one person says it, don't worry about it. She said, but if 3 people say it, then maybe.
Maybe there's some.
So,
I think, though, it's the word narcissist has always been very, I don't know, almost light to me. Like it doesn't carry much weight anymore, because I think you could, in an age where you are able to broadcast yourself to anyone through a variety of platforms, through a variety of mediums, I think it's kind of old hat to be calling someone self-centered when that's the world they live in.
Exactly. Everybody's trying to put themselves out there. And it's become kind of a pop culture. Everybody says narcissist, and they're describing their boyfriends or whatever, or girlfriends. Yeah. It's just become cool now to say it, kind of like with the OCD thing.
And I think part of it, and it's going to sound silly, but I think part of it is definitely that it sounds right. If that makes sense.
Yes.
Whenever you call someone a narcissist, very rarely is someone going to look at you and be like, what are you talking about?
Right. Everybody knows what a narcissist is.
And everybody believes that, you know what a narcissist is, and they trust you to not be calling someone who isn't.
Right.
But I think that also sort of shows a link between, because a lot of people, they know that social media has changed the way that we look at ourselves and the world around us, but they just sort of say that, and then they don't develop it, either because they don't know how to, or because they just know that people have said it around them,
Yeah. It's just a label that people throw out there now. Because true narcissism, I think a true narcissistic person, there's a category for them in the psychological,
right?
Like true narcissism is a real psychological disorder, right. I believe, but the term we're throwing around now is not that.
Right.
It's just something slapped on somebody.
I think it's, the difference between saying like, I have a caffeine addiction versus I have a caffeine dependency. Like one of those sounds way worse than the other.
That is true. Yeah, I never thought about that.
And, there is sort of a difference, because you can be the sort of person who wakes up and has a cup of coffee every morning, but then that's also still different from the type of person who wakes up and has 3 cups of coffee, and then at lunch they have 3 more cups of coffee. And then, that's why that was what the original like brain thought of this podcast was there's sort of people who will look at people who write poetry and go either, whoa, they're way too smart for me, or wow, look at how self-absorbed that guy is.
Yeah, or emotional or whatever. And
kind of weak.
Yeah.
Which is interesting to me, because if you sit someone down and you ask them about it, like I've done with you and the guests before you, no one ever really says, oh yeah, I think poetry is just so lame and weird.
No. I mean, if you think about it, any song that we listen to on the radio is a poem,
Exactly.
So everybody loves songs.
Oh, yeah. And then, there's even people who try to, I know especially rap comes under fire a lot, because people are like, it's not real music. I don't remember who said it, but it was a big speaker type person who was like, rap's not real music. And everybody sort of came at him, because obviously that's not correct.
Right. It's got a lot of angst. Some rap does. But
it still comes from a place of creativity, no matter how, out there it is.
Right.
So with that, would you like to write another line?
Sure.
All right. Beyond that, what do you think is the most potent form of art? Like, what do you think immediately gets to people's sort of like core, if that makes sense?
Oh, that's a good question. You mean like among music and art?
Yeah,
and
I do think it's different between each person, right? But if you were to look at like the general populace, what do you think immediately gets to them?
And this may be not the answer you're looking for, because this is a poetry show.
It's an art show.
Oh, okay.
We keep things freeform around here.
Okay. I think probably visual art.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
You have stunned me, but not for the reason that you think.
Okay. Well, why?
My initial thought was that it was going to be music. Because,
oh, yeah.
People talk about life without music all the time. But definitely, I am interested that you would say visual art, because I'm curious as to why.
Well, and it may just be me that not visual art hits me the most, because I am a graphics person too.
Right.
a graphic designer, so I try to communicate through pictures
Right.
too. So I guess that, and we see that everywhere,
Right.
and it may not be like real art, but any billboard we see is like art,
Yeah.
and people are putting messages out there.
There's still like a sort of aesthetic value to it, because that's the
Right.
point of it. Especially, you mentioned ads. I mean, they're designed to be, visually stimulating,
Right.
because that catches your attention at first.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's like, something on a white background that's completely, it is designed at the front, I believe, to draw you in.
Right.
And I think a part of that does stem from like a sort of natural beauty that we observe everywhere. Because, when you said that, the first thing that came to my mind was, like sunsets and,
Oh yeah.
The aurora borealis, stuff like that.
That's true.
Because people have spent, a long time drawing and painting and otherwise capturing that sort of natural beauty. And I think sometimes they can make it even more beautiful.
Well, that's true. And that reminds me of something that I think it was Van Gogh said this, but his painting Starry Night.
Yeah.
It was very, well known. But when he painted that, I believe he was in an insane asylum or like a psychological ward. I
Right.
probably shouldn't say insane asylum.
I mean,
But when he looked out the window, that's what he saw. And he said the reason that he drew that and painted that was he wanted other people to be able to see it
right.
and think it was beautiful also.
Huh.
So,
So yeah, I think that's a perfect like description of it. We sort of take in the natural beauty around us, and then that inspires us to go on and use it to fuel other creative endeavors.
yeah.
And I think that applies to. Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think that applies to anything, not necessarily just visual art, because you could see a sunrise and have something come to mind, even writing wise, that you just have to get out there. And I think that can spiral into people working off your work, and I think it all just stems back from that.
Well, and that brings to mind a thought that, because I kind of suffer with this, but it's kind of like an existential type crisis. Because people who are creative, it's like, because a lot of people don't see value necessarily in poetry or whatever. It's
Right.
like, but that's like totally fulfilling your soul's need,
Yeah.
but then when you put it out there, you're like, well, that's just a piece of paper laying on the table. Nobody's going to read it. Nobody's going to give any value to it. And Melissa Bernstein, when I talked to her, she and her husband started a puzzle making business, and she wrote a book called Lifelines.
Yeah.
And she started writing these poetic verses, and she suffered existential depression too, because she's like, what's the meaning in any of this? Writing this poetry or anything. And she told me that there are two different things that you do in life. There are telic, I think that's how it's pronounced, it's TELIC, and that's stuff that we have to do, like getting groceries, washing the dishes, doing laundry. And then there are the atelic, it's ATELIC, and she said that's the stuff that fulfills your soul, and you have to have a balance of both
Right.
in your life. So
Because definitely, otherwise you get caught up on, oh, well, what's the point?
Right.
I'm only here for so long. There's only so much I can do.
mm-hmm.
But then there's a philosopher who put this forward, and I don't remember who it is, so you'll have to forgive me. I should be more of a literature nut, I suppose. But they sort of take that and they say, yeah, there's not much of a point to it, so why don't you just go do anything? Why don't you just go make the best of what you've got and, let whatever's beyond that sort itself out?
That's true. So make anything mean something. Is that?
Yeah, find meaning in
kinda
whatever means something to you.
Yeah.
Very sort of keep your head held high, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and just like I always thought, if you didn't sell a poem or if you didn't sell a book, or it didn't have value.
Yeah.
And she kind of taught me that you just
as long as it
do
has value to you.
Right. And she said, just give the stuff away. Like if you write a book, just give it away as a present or something. I'm like, oh, yeah, I never
And people
thought
will
about
find
that.
that meaningful.
Yeah, they do. It's fulfilling.
And on that note, if you'd like to write a line.
Sure.
So, and on that note, the way I always like to finish is I always like to ask if there's one thing you'd like to just put out into the world, if there's one message you'd like to get across, what do you think it would be?
Oh, well, thank you for asking that. But when we were talking about Melissa Bernstein, and she said, do the things, just for the sake of doing it, and this one verse comes to my mind from the Bible, and it says, whatsoever you do, do it for the Lord, with all your might. And so I guess that's the whole purpose of life, and that's why we live and do, and that's the meaning to it.
Right.
So,
And definitely, even I'd say even if you're not a Christian, you can sort of take comfort in that because, it still gives across the message that you just need to keep going.
right.
And a lot of people, they get caught up on, well, what should I keep going for? And a lot of people will just say, well, I just keep going without thinking about it. But I think somewhere in the middle, there's something nice to be found, a life where you're going forward for a purpose to you or to God or to whatever you'd like it to be. But you still realize that eventually, it does end, and that's okay.
Right.
I like that.
Well, thank you.
So we'll write one more line, and then we'll close this out.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
You ready?
That was rough, yeah. That last line
come
was
on.
rough.
It's never rough. Do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Oh, you go ahead.
All right. Many thoughts can stun the brain. Speculation, not a reasonable man's game. Why are we here? Is there a point? Something more? Truth be told, I don't worry too much. No one's really keeping score.
You wrote that while we were here?
Yeah.
That is so good.
Thanks.
That is- Oh,
That's the first one I've actually felt pretty good about at the end of these, to be honest.
wow. Well, now I'm embarrassed. To
Oh,
read
don't be.
Okay. I am. I do have a background in English. You may not realize it after this, but it says, I hate math, but I love words. Something soothing seems to come from verse. Not everyone will understand, for understanding isn't my plan. Inspiration fills the soul. When you feel the void, it makes you whole. I've found my meaning in giving back and blessing others. There's my impact.
Wow.
Oh.
No, I do like that.
Oh, thank you. I need to
I
say
think
what
that's
I
beautiful.
guess.
Yeah,
Oh,
please
thank
do.
you.
Thank you very much for being on. I've very much appreciated it.
This was very fun, and I'm glad it was on poetry. I love that.
Thank you.
So,
Good topic.
all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful evening
You
and
too.
good night.
Thanks. Bye-bye.